Big welcome to our live audience for the Digital Health Investor Talk show. I'm your host, Stephen Wardell. I'm the managing partner of Wardell Advisors, a digital health advisory firm, and the author of The Future of Digital Health. Wardell Advisors is helping digital health companies address issues around growth, fundraising, trade sales, and strategic alternatives, giving you more options in today's challenging environment. You can follow me on x.com/Stephen Wardell. Our show today is on the topic of GenAI is revolutionizing pharmacy. And our guest is Harry Travis. Harry is the president of the Travis Group and a former top executive at CVS Caremark, and he's also a former pharmacist. Welcome to the show, Harry.
Hi, Steve. Great to be here.
Thanks. So this show is being recorded, and this will be included in our podcast series called the Digital Health Investor Talk Show. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple and Spotify, and we love it if you like and follow and leave a review. So this is not investment advice, and we are not investment advisors. Here's the format of today's show. It's 90 minutes long, and Harry and I will spend the first part of the show discussing the news and the macro picture and some other topics. And then for the second half of the show, we'll have our special topic of the day on GenAI's revolutionizing pharmacy, and we'll take your questions throughout in the LinkedIn text chat. So welcome to the show, Harry, and would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Hello, Steve. It's great to see you again and great to be here. And thanks for the opportunity to be on the show. I am a trained pharmacist. I'm a proud graduate of the University of Pittsburgh School of Pharmacy. I worked in retail pharmacy in Washington, D.C., in a chain of pharmacies called People's Drugstores that eventually turned into CVS drugstores. Worked there for a couple of years and then decided to get an MBA at the Darden School at the University of Virginia. And then never really practiced pharmacy after that, but stayed in the industry and kind of turned my career to the management side. First was a long stint at Baxter and hospital products related to pharmacy. And then as a result of a deal, ended up with Cardinal in their specialty pharmaceutical distribution business in Nashville, where in the late 90s, where I got the first look at some of the early stage biotech products that were being launched. Growth hormone and insulin and some of the products out of companies in Boston like Biogen and Cerezyme for multiple sclerosis. Was then recruited to Accredo, one of the very first specialty pharmacies that was coming up to service these kind of unique drugs, and got kind of my early days in the specialty pharmacy world. Accredo was publicly traded, but ultimately acquired by Medco, which at the time was the biggest specialty pharmacy out there. So we were acquired by Medco. Medco's headquarters were in New Jersey. Accredo was in Memphis. I kind of liked living below the frost line, so I didn't want to move to the corporate headquarters. So jumped out, but eventually got recruited by Aetna to run Aetna's specialty pharmacy and mail order operation in Orlando, Florida, which is where I live now. So did that, which was fascinating, running a specialty pharmacy and mail order operation inside of a big health plan. So saw the inside of that. Stepped out to do an entrepreneurial gig in digital health for a couple of years, but then got pulled back in after CVS acquired Aetna to kind of run my old team and the CVS team. So the short story is I finished up my corporate career at CVS Caremark a couple of years ago as their senior VP for the specialty pharmacy, which at the time was the largest specialty pharmacy in the country. Their big mail order operations, all prior auth. This is all on the PBM side of CVS Caremark. And then 2 years ago, 3 years ago, jumped out on my own to be advisor, board member, and build a network of kind of like-minded executives who are solopreneurs, independent consultants that we call the RX Roundtable. And we have spent the last year advising, interviewing, and helping early stage AI kind of pharmacy services and pharmacy tech companies navigate the pharmacy space. So I probably talked to 40 different CEOs of what I'll call early stage AI powered pharmacy tech companies, one flavor of another over the last year. And you're going to get the benefit of all of those conversations here over the next hour or so.
That's great. Thank you. And I remember you have been sort of sounding the alarm about AI in pharmacy for a while. And so this will be nice to sort of check in again and hear about what you're seeing today.
You're right.
So Now we'll jump into macro news. Macro news, I usually look at this as macro news that affects the innovation economy, the young company leaders in digital health and digital pharmacy, and also the investors who back them. And so we're seeing a continued strength in the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ is at 23.5 thousand, which is near record highs. And the markets are up today. The Dow's up 400 points today. And CNBC is saying that somewhat counterintuitively, ADP published its job reports, and the job report was weak. And this was attributed to the government shutdown and also to ICE enforcement on immigration. And now a weak jobs report is usually bad news, but it makes people think that at the next Fed meeting, which is next week, that this will cause the Fed to cut rates. And the markets definitely want the Fed to cut rates by 25 basis points. And this increases the chance. It makes the prospects of inflation look weaker, and this increases the chances that the Fed will cut rates. And so the Dow's up and the NASDAQ's up today on expectations that we will see a Fed rate cut of at least 25 basis points. The Fed is in a cutting cycle. But every time they're concerned about inflation, they don't cut during a Fed Open Markets Committee meeting. And that's sort of the debate in the market's mind. And the current federal funds rate is at 3.75 to 4% range set in the October meeting. And that's down from, I think we had over 5% at some point, which was raised by the Fed rapidly to address concerns about inflation starting a couple of years ago. So anyway, so that's kind of the overall, and I am surprised by just that the economy feels weak, but the Nasdaq is at near record highs. So I don't know any numbers any reaction you have to this, Harry, or numbers you like to follow.
I heard a great description of the economy the other day on one of the many podcasts I listened to. That the economy is like a deer in the headlights right now. It's just kind of frozen. If you're an employer, are you worried about tariffs? Are you worried about trade? Are you worried about AI? The easy thing to do is just kind of stand pat. And so I think it's a very kind of uncertain time. And that's the best I have to offer. I can't give you a prediction on interest rates, that sort of thing, but I am watching the labor statistics very closely.
So I've heard it described similarly to you, but I've heard it described as the Trump pause. And so the Trump administration came in January. It's been less than a year, but he's made many sort of startling policy changes in healthcare. And then we also had the government shutdown. And so also tariffs, which can affect healthcare companies as well. And so this means that, a lot in the innovation economy, we live based on contracts with the big institutions of healthcare, with hospitals, with health plans, with big pharma companies buying tech and software. And so those department heads who write the checks, they don't know what their revenue is going to be next year. They don't know what their budget's going to be next year. And it's a very trivial matter for them to say, well, we were going to sign this contract to buy some software, but now we'll just push off the decision 3 months. And then 3 months later, they push it off again. And that's the pause right there. And that means that, that's a trivial decision for a brand manager at a pharma company to make, but it's a big deal if you're the vendor trying to sell into that brand manager. And so that, and I also heard another description recently. I've seen a lot of friends and peers laid off from jobs. And then it's not clear what's going to happen with their career now. Everyone's laying off at the same time. Nobody's hiring. And then there's this prospect of AI sort of taking mid-level manager jobs and knowledge worker jobs at the same time. And so a lot of people sort of figuring out what this means for them. And in the past, there was this dynamic innovation sector that was hiring rapidly of small companies, et cetera. And that's not really working as well in digital health. I would call digital health as a troubled sector because there just haven't been a lot of great exits in digital health. So investors are not confident in digital health. And the IPO environment is part of that. So, but I've also heard it called the barbell economy. And you could apply this to the innovation sector and fundraising as well, which is that there are some sort of privileged sectors, you could call them. And one of them is software and programs around GLP-1 drugs. And another one is anything generative AI. And another one is selling into pharma. Pharma seems to have cash in a way that hospitals and health plans don't have cash right now. But if you're not in those, and that's one end of the barbell, but if you're not in one of those more privileged sectors, then things are not great. And we saw in a Rock Health report that there's strong venture investment in digital health, but a lot of it is going into mega rounds in GenAI companies not into companies trying to raise their Series B who meet all their milestones from their Series A few years ago, but are struggling to raise their Series B because investors are focused on other things right now. Any other thoughts on macro issues?
The one point with respect to labor for your audience, there's lots of reports out there. Everyone's trying to get their arms around a prediction on the impact of AI on the labor market. I just started to scan this report by a group at MIT called the Iceberg Project. And they're classically saying we're seeing a minor impact on the labor market due to AI, but it's like the tip of the iceberg. Or there is a lot more underneath that is yet to hit us. That right now the predictions are, kind of in the mid to high teens impact of AI, but it could be as high as McKinsey in a different report says 50% of the jobs, 50% of the white collar jobs think I'm paraphrasing here, 50% of white collar jobs could be replaced by AI. So we better figure out if anything close to that is going to happen, what we're going to do with all of these workers.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And so for our audience, by the way, feel free to ask questions in the chat and we'll jump to questions when we see them. So now moving from macro news to just issues around valuation, fundraising, IPO, consolidation, shakeout. So here I would describe the sort of the innovation economy. The innovation economy is young company leaders and the investors who back them as continued disappointment. And so we saw sort of signs of a possible spring earlier in the year, signs of an improved environment, and that was going to include a better stock market environment and then IPOs of digital health companies. And there's been sort of a frozen structure of many young companies, and this was going to move into consolidation and shakeout and fundraise and IPOs. And instead, we've seen these continue to be very slow and conditions continue to be not great for these. Once again, an exception for GenAI companies in healthcare, where there's actually a bit of a bubble going on in the administrative work for hospitals in GenAI and healthcare. And so continued disappointment with the environment, but also signs that, this can't go on forever and that we could see an improved environment in the future. Looking at the SaaS Capital Index for the end of November, it fell a little bit. So this is a look at most public SaaS companies, and they're trading today at about 5.7 times revenue. So that's been trickling down over the past year. A year ago, it was about 7 times. And during the boom, it was over 15 times. And so this has really come down a lot for companies and for public companies. Most of these are not really growth companies, top line growth under 15% probably. And so that's continued slipping of the SaaS Capital Index, which I find to be a useful index to look at. And many prominent digital health companies are actually valued low compared to this index. So Teladoc is valued significantly below this. When Accolade was purchased, it was purchased for significantly below this. So digital health is actually, it's sort of in the penalty box right now, you could say. And so then I thought I'd just call attention to, you rarely see a prominent digital health company shut down. You probably should see them shut down more. This is the shakeout aspect of this. Somehow, many of them, even though they haven't been able to raise money in a while, even though they're cash flow negative, have managed to keep going for a while. But Inbound Health just announced that it is shutting down. So Inbound Health, a value-based care enablement platform for health systems, has announced that it is shutting down. It was spun out of Aetna Health, a major health system in Minneapolis, 2 years ago with $20 million in funding. And they blamed regulatory uncertainty as a contributing factor around the extension of the acute hospital care at home waiver program. So, but you seldom see, somehow digital health companies have managed to keep quiet about shutdowns. They can be small, they can be silent, they can be sold in asset sales. They can be, there's other ways, but I think we're now starting to see some more prominent companies shut down. And that's overall, it's sad. It's also needed and healthy for the system, but we're starting to see more trade journal articles about digital health companies shutting down. And then IPOs, just to summarize IPOs. So in the beginning of the year, we had 3 IPOs, Hinge and Heartflow, and then I'm forgetting the third one, the competitor of Teladoc went public, and that people thought that was a sign of a lot of IPOs this year. There's over 100 unicorns that would like to go public. The stock market valuations are high, but they've not been able to go public. And the number of companies have quietly registered to go public, but they didn't make it out. I assume since we're in early December, if we're not hearing noises about them going public, that they're not going to go public before the holidays and we're into next year. And this is probably due to the stock market having high standards, wanting to see a high top line growth rate and high gross margins and a plan if their earnings negative to get to earnings positive quickly. And these companies not making that standard, therefore they can't go public. Although the investors would like for them to go public into a positive market environment. And non-digital health companies are going public, but we just haven't seen. So just not high quality enough for today's environment is the assumption about the 100 unicorns that have not gone public yet. And that's a disappointment. We had 3 IPOs. We thought there'd be many more. Thought there'd be maybe 10 more. And there haven't been any more since the first 3 in the first half of the year. So Harry, any thoughts on the valuation environment, fundraising environment, et cetera?
On fundraising over the last, call it 3 years, think of it as right around November 22, kind of the launch of ChatGPT, when all of our worlds changed, right? A year before that to a year and a half after it, there's been a mini boomlet of investment in, as I said, AI-powered pharmacy tech platforms. And these could be kind of paperwork optimizers and prior auth optimizers and intake processing. I could probably total up $1 billion of investment that has just gone into what we'll call the pharmacy tech space in the last 3 years, which is a lot for that little niche space. Companies that, prior to AI, you had never heard of. Companies like Infinitus, Plenful, Develop, Neon, these are all relatively early stage companies. I think everyone agrees that there will be a shakeout. We're in kind of the boom phase. There's going to be a consolidation of many of these companies because most of them are developing single point solutions to a step in the process. And we'll get into that later on. But we're kind of in not the very early stages, but kind of at the middle innings of the AI pharmacy tech kind of consolidation here, or end of the boom.
Yeah, thanks. Interesting. And Felicia in our audience mentions that Babylon also filed for bankruptcy. Yes, there have been some very prominent bankruptcies. Babylon, that was a very prominent company. Surprise. I think it had a large EU presence as well as a US presence, raised a lot of money. And filed for bankruptcy. There was also Pear Health, which raised a large amount of money in prescription digital therapeutics and went bankrupt. And then there's just Teladoc underperforming, not bankrupt, since it acquired Livongo. And these have become sort of negative bellwethers. They're cited examples for the industry. And a criticism by capital allocators is that digital health just hasn't had enough good exits. There's something about there's some strong exits. HIMSS is a strong exit, but it just hasn't. It's disappointed investors, and investors are wondering if they're going to re-up for further investment and for harvesting their capital and putting it back into this sector instead of other sectors. So then I'll mention, just a moment for any recent last couple of weeks policy news that's affected your sector, or announcements from Trump or RFK Jr. That's affecting your business. And I'll mention that the government shutdown had a very negative impact on telehealth businesses because they require a renewal of authorization to practice telehealth across state lines, and they couldn't get that renewal while the government was shut down. And so that problem is now ended, and those companies are getting back to business now that the shutdown has stopped. But any other recent policy announcements from Trump or RFK Jr. or just in Washington?
Well, I'm not even going to try to summarize all of the various health proclamations, but trying to focus on pharma, drugs versus pharmacy. They're kind of interwoven. One where you have a change in pharma pricing or drug sourcing, it generally flows downstream, has some impact on the pharmacy business. And of course, the pharmacy business and pricing is fraught with acronyms that no one understands. So I'll take a moment here to decode 2 important acronyms when it comes to pharma, drug pricing. Okay. So In the IRA, the government now can negotiate and set a maximum fair price, an MFP, on certain drugs. So that the first set of drugs, 10 or 12 drugs, that pricing goes into effect on January 1 of this coming year. And everybody is watching that very closely to see how the pharmacies will be reimbursed for these drugs and whether it's going to be sufficient for them to keep them in stock, that there might be an unintended consequence of this and that you might not be able to get these drugs because the pharmacies can't make any money on it. So watch the Medicare, the maximum fair price, the MFP discussions around the IRA. Separately, there is most favored nations, the MFN. Okay, so President Trump has declared, we are not going to pay more than any other country for particular drugs, and we deserve most favored nation status for these drugs. That is happening on an individual company by company basis between the White House and the pharmaceutical manufacturer. So you hear Novo Nordisk has cut a deal to offer, Ozempic at a certain price, direct to consumer and all of that. So they are now kind of out of the penalty box from a maximum for most favored nation. So most favored nations is happening kind of company by company, personality by personality with the White House, whereas the IRA maximum fair price is legislated. There's a set of 10 drugs. There are more drugs that'll happen on January 1 of 27.
Really interesting. Yeah. And I find this whole setup to be very odd that the president is negotiating drug prices with individual pharma companies. And yet at the same time, I can imagine a lot of people benefiting from, after January, being able to go to, what is the website, trumprx.gov, something like that, and being able to get a GLP-1 and maybe get their weight down. Maybe they've wanted to for 5 years, haven't been able to, and they'll finally be able to lose some of that weight at a more affordable price. So I'm looking forward to seeing that in January, but it does seem odd to have the president negotiating drug prices personally with pharma CEOs and then making big announcements out of the White House for that.
We are living in very interesting times.
Well, good. And for our audience, any questions about or any policy or Trump or RFK news you want to throw in the chat? Well, so also now moving on to business and trade journal news about our respective sectors. So I'll call attention to a really remarkable fundraise that's in a closely watched sector, and that is the longevity sector. So longevity is a really interesting, unusual sector. First and foremost, because it's a consumer-facing sector. So you're often talking about people buying medical tests. It could be buying an MRI image or buying a blood-based cancer screening test and paying dollar for dollar out of their own pockets for it. Maybe paying $500 or $1,000 for this, and then getting customized programs for greater health span, greater vitality, greater wellness, and ultimately greater longevity. And so this is a kind of a medicine. It's like primary care medicine and preventive medicine, and even longevity medicine is actually an official discipline of medicine. People paying more for it. And there have been, in the last 3 years, there's been an unexpectedly large amount of investment in this sector, and a clear leader is Function Health. Function Health, that's Mark Hyman's organization. I think no one would have expected it would have grown so big so fast. But this is also an area that's littered with failures as well. There have been chain clinics in New York and other places that have started up and then shut down. And apparently it's just really hard to get those customers in the door. It's expensive to get those, and hard to get those customers in the door. And then when they're in the door and they do their $1,000 worth of tests, it's hard to keep them. It's hard to get them to pay $1,000 a year too for their tests. But somehow, Function Health, that they're claiming a fast revenue growth, I think, and they have a really interesting partnership with an elite gym chain as well, and some other partnerships. So, but Function Health raised $300 million, an oversubscribed Series B round at a $2.5 billion valuation. So this is far and away the biggest success of the wave we've seen of longevity companies. This is another hot sector that's not an AI, not necessarily an AI sector. You can throw AI into it, like an AI coach, for example, but it's not necessarily, AI is not central to it. And then, so this is led by Redpoint Ventures with continued participation by Andreessen Horowitz. Also, I thought it was fun to see that Matt Damon invested in this round, and Magic Johnson, and Samsung Next and Menlo Ventures. These are the funds I mentioned. These are top digital health funds. A bit of a surprise to see Samsung Next in there. I wonder if there's a chip angle or a device angle to this. And then sometimes you start to get a feeling of a bubble if you see names like Matt Damon or Magic Johnson thrown in there, perhaps. So Function Health,
Well,
I see them as
Jason Bourne had many lives. You know.
You don't want to mess with these guys. So, and then I see Function Health as a preventive health and a longevity health company, but they call themselves a whole body health company. So they're definitely, I think that marketing language is there to make them more broadly appealing than just longevity. So I think we've seen some concerning stumbles of number of companies in this longevity space, in part because it sells to the consumer. That's a tough market to sell into, but a standout success so far has been Function Health, at least as measured by money in and valuation levels, and we'll see if it can build to make that pay off. And for our audience, if you have any business or trade journal news, feel free to throw it in the chat, and we'll comment on it. So, any thoughts on the longevity sector and Function Health?
Well, I think that someone is developing a kind of demand price curve that, to your point about subscriptions, okay, how much value do you get for what price it's going to cost you to pay for a subscription? Because if you're going to get in one of these longevity programs, it's not once and done. You've got to, stay on it. And if it's supplement based or scanning based, it's a combination of a whole bunch of things. And it's no different than, okay, my longevity program is to keep going to the gym. But even that, you look at the turnover in gym memberships. So there's probably something there. No doubt about it.
So yeah, and so I mean, for longevity, the formula is relative. You get enormous benefit from just sleeping well, eating well, not too much, exercising, and it's very simple, but it's hard. It's changing your entire relationship with food, changing your
I will add that the majority of the American population, we should all take a demographics class in the 330 or 40 million Americans, and what percentage of them are living paycheck to paycheck. And these longevity programs generally are at or near the top of the pyramid, and that where our real population health problems are in the folks who are working hard out there every day to just kind of get by and say, okay, well, you need to eat more asparagus or something like that. Yeah, let me get a better job and then I'll do that. So it's many layers to the problem here.
Yep. So other trade journal news. So Next Health, which is a platform for women and families on Medicaid that provides access to medical, behavioral, and social care. They announced the close of a Series A, a $22 million round, including investors Socium Ventures, Amboy Street Ventures, and Impact America Fund. So I found this interesting. There weren't that many fundraise announcements the last couple of weeks. The Function Health announcement was the big one. But what I'll call attention to here, so this is not a fashionable GenAI story for Next Health, and the funds are not classic digital health venture funds. So we're not seeing that many deals done by classic digital health venture funds. And then when we see a digital health deal done, sometimes it's done by non-digital health venture funds like Socium Ventures, Amboy Street Ventures, and Impact America Fund. And so what's going on here? I think Next Health probably went to all the digital health venture funds and they weren't interested. And so then they went to alternate funds and they raised a successful round from alternate funds. And so I've seen that story again and again where the digital health companies that do raise money are not raising them from the classic digital health venture funds, but those funds in turn are investing in pharma tech and GenAI and longevity. So and then also just an interesting, we're not seeing a lot of M&A. I predicted we would see more M&A. We're not seeing that much, but I did see a deal announced. So XR Health acquired Innerworld. XR Health is a leading virtual reality healthcare company, and Innerworld is a virtual reality mental health company. So I think we'll see more of these targeted acquisitions where you could see right now this is getting XR Health a product and a customer base through this acquisition. And this is a tough time. We don't know, the term's not disclosed, but in general, I don't think that consolidators are paying top dollar for young companies. I think they're able to pick and choose who they want to make sort of reasonable offers to companies to acquire them. And we don't know the terms in this case, though. But that's kind of environment that we're in right now. So Innerworld they're buying Innerworld to expand their immersive therapeutic care portfolio. Sounds very nice. And XR Health has also acquired another VR company, a chronic pain platform company, in February. So something about XR Health, they're now become a consolidator in the world of VR health. But those are some of and so it's nice to see little acquisitions happen, and this is one of those. But we're not seeing as much as people had predicted, and we're still in a relatively slow moving and frozen market environment. So, Harry, any thoughts on those or any other trade journal stories you want to call attention to?
Well, I kind of watch for articles where AI is now to the point where it's delivering on research results, or we're beginning to see tangible results from AI. One that I'd call out is, and it's fascinating because it's tied back to, Mark Zuckerberg. He and his wife have this thing, the Chan Zuckerberg Health Initiative, big philanthropic organization that's funding a lot of stuff in genetic research. They're funding a project, I think, at Harvard that just released some really interesting data that they've now been able to identify what certain genomic aberrations can be tied to diseases. Obviously, your gene and all the genes that are in your DNA is a massive data set, and it's almost perfectly set for AI to help decode all of that. So it's good that one of the guys that's making millions on AI right now is pouring some of it back into medical research. So if your audience is looking for that, I would look at you don't have to Google anymore. Just ask your AI assistant, was there an announcement by Harvard and the Chan Zuckerberg Health Initiative on genetic research? And you'll probably get everything that you need.
Thanks. And so, skipping forward a little bit, so this is a crowd pleaser segment of our show. What is a technology or a use of GenAI that has improved your life that our audience can hear about and maybe adopt as well? And so I'll throw out there that I use Grok for some things. I use ChatGPT for other things. I use Perplexity for other things. And I've decided recently to just move everything into using Gemini. And so one reason is that when this all began, we all remember our first experience with ChatGPT, and different companies had different strengths. Someone would have a strong text-to-video product, and someone else wouldn't even have a text-to-video product. And someone else would launch deep research, and nobody else had deep research. And so you were playing this game of saying, well, I'll use Google for deep research, but I'll use ChatGPT for text to image or whatever. And so what seems to have happened in the last 6 months, let's call it, is that Google basically has every best-selling category, and they're excellent in all of them. And so now you don't have to play this game anymore of jumping back and forth. I mean, I remember when I used Perplexity because they read recent news sources and provided footnotes, and now everyone does that basically. And so you're not missing anything by using Google Gemini for everything. And then I also happen to use for my work productivity suite, Google Paid Workspace, and I use for my personal productivity suite, just Gmail and Google Drive that's free. So part of the battle here is to train yourself on interacting with the AI and knowing what it can do, and feeling comfortable with it and having experience using it. And so I'm just simplifying everything by just saying that I'm going to use Gemini. And then I'm going to try to use Gemini with my applications. And so if I have data in Google Spreadsheets, maybe you can use Gemini for your own data in your own spreadsheet. You can't do that with Perplexity. Perplexity doesn't have a productivity suite. Or use Gemini on your stash of years of work Gmail. You can't do that with ChatGPT. ChatGPT doesn't have your email history. And so that's what I'm thinking of doing. Just simplify it on Google, because it's clear to me that's going to be the most helpful to me in my professional life. But Harry, you got any thoughts on that? And then do you have a technology that's improved your life?
Well, it's interesting the transition you're going through with respect to Google. You're a little ahead of me. I really like Perplexity, but I'm I also work on Google Workspace. So I run my business on Google Workspace, and I can feel the gravitational pull of Google. So right kind of a little bit schizophrenic between Perplexity and Gemini, but I can feel the tug. But from a technology standpoint, directly to your question, name a technology that's improved my life, I'm going to go a little bit low tech, but not that low tech. And I'm wearing it. That's my Garmin sport watch. I am a big fan of, I had, I don't know, maybe 3 different versions of the Apple Watch. But when Garmin came out with their Epix Gen 2 sport watch, that's just got 5 days worth of battery life and a screen that you can read from across the room, sold me on it. And it's just got great sport apps in it, from golf, swimming. It can tell me when I'm swimming what stroke I'm swimming. Okay, whether I'm breaststroke or crawl or backstroke, amazing. So I love it. But kind of keeping on the health theme and the longevity theme, there's just a report issued recently from Northwestern University on, and you can see this in some headlines, a new number that can indicate your cardiac health. One number that indicates your cardiac health. And it is the ratio of your daily average heart rate to your average steps taken per day. Daily heart rate, DHR, DERPS is getting the acronym right. But you essentially say, okay, your daily heart rate is 60 beats per minute. You get 10,000 steps a day. That turns into 0.006 is the number. And they were able to take a massive set of data that exists in the NIH database, this big NIH program called All of Me, where they're trying to get 1 million people to send their medical records and blood samples to them. And then that's open source to researchers. So they're able to find out, okay, what are people recording on all of their Garmins and Apples and Fitbits, and then pull their medical records and tie a really tight correlation to your heart rate divided by the number of steps per day. I actually sent an email off to Garmin to say, you need to include this in the little daily summary that you get every day on your iPhone. You need to put this ratio in there. I'll see if I get an answer from them.
That's great. Really interesting. And I remember I was so annoyed by my Fitbit. This is now 5 years ago or so. You would say to your Fitbit, I'm about to go for a jog. And you'd tell it that. And then at the end of the jog, you would tell it, I've stopped my jog. Or you might be in the gym. I'm about to participate in an exercise class in the gym. And then you tell it you stopped. And that's been flipped around now because a growing number of activity trackers will instead, you don't have to tell them. At the end of the day, they say at 3:00 today, you jogged or you played golf. And they know from their sensing of movement what you did. They tell you played golf not for 90 minutes, but actually for 110 minutes. And here's what and you burn these many calories while playing golf or whatever. So that flipping has made it more sort of passive tracking, which is so much nicer than when you used to have to tell your watch using a horrible user interface
Right.
that you're about to start working or something. So very cool. Well, so now moving to a section which is upcoming conferences. And so in my world, the world of young digital health companies, thinking about fundraising, that sort of thing, the big conference coming up is the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. And so if you're preparing for the JP Morgan Health Conference, you should be reaching out to your contact list. You should decide what your agenda is. Is it biz dev deals? Is it product sales? Is it fundraising? And you should be writing everyone you know saying, let's meet at JP Morgan. And then when you get to JP Morgan, then you have to find a place to meet once you're there, which could be a restaurant or a hotel lobby or something. And then get your meetings done that sets your agenda for the next 6 months or so. And so if you haven't been sending those messages, you should be sending them this week to get to. So, and then the conference itself is the second week of January, but no one's really paying attention during the last week of December or the first week of January. And so now's the time to be thinking of that. And, it looks like it'll be a normal JP Morgan conference, strong attendance, and people are looking for signs that the fundraising environment is getting better. We're not seeing, other than GenAI, we're not seeing those signs right now, but people are looking for signs that with rates coming down and perhaps with the stock market up and maybe some digital health IPOs for earlier in the coming year. That should get the fundraising environment better over time. So, but I think that the GenAI trend has been more persistent than people expected. So there's been a diversion of funding going from early stage risky digital health ventures to super rounds to GenAI companies in digital health, such as the bubble going on in hospital administrative GenAI work around ambient scribing and that sort of thing. So, Harry, in your world, what conference are people looking forward to?
Well, I'm not going to JPM this year. I've been to it in the past, but no reason to go to it this year. But if any of your listeners are going and they're interested in, okay, where do I go to kind of rub elbows with pharmacy folks, since we're talking about pharmacy here, I'll give a shout out to my friends at Bassberry and Sims Law Firm in Nashville. They're one of the largest healthcare law firms in Nashville. Go to their website, bassberry.com, and see if you can get an appointment with somebody in their meeting space that they have set up in one of the restaurants out there. So it's a place to shelter from the storm of all of the running around on the street. They have a very large healthcare practice led by Angela Humphreys and a very large pharmacy practice led by Mike Hess and Shannon Wiley, who are friends of mine who do a great job. So if you're interested in kind of learning what's going on, it's almost like a mini conference there because there's so many people coming and going. But other conferences coming up, we have one of the biggest pharmacy conferences. In fact, it's probably the biggest pharmacy conference in terms of attendees is the American Society of Health System Pharmacies in Vegas next week, December 7th to 10, I believe. It was originally the American Society of Hospital Pharmacists, but as hospitals became health systems and health systems expanded their outpatient pharmacies, the outpatient pharmacy business, the specialty pharmacy business associated with all these large hospital and health systems now plays a major role at this meeting. There's like 14,000 pharmacists at that meeting. Big coverage by pharmaceutical manufacturers, a little by the payers, but it's more pharma and health systems. That's a good meeting. And then going into the spring, you've got PCMA, the Pharmacy Care Management Association, which is the advocacy organization for PBMs. Their business forum is March 9 down here in Orlando. You have the Academy for Managed Care Pharmacy, which is all of the managed care pharmacists in Nashville in April 12. And then the big specialty pharmacy conference, probably the second biggest specialty pharmacy conference on the calendar, is the Assembia conference in Vegas, late April 26. And that has, the borders of that have kind of expanded beyond just specialty. It's really lots of different kind of outpatient pharmacy. You're going to find Mark Cuban there occasionally and folks like that because specialty is such a big part of the business now. But those are the major ones that I've got on my calendar.
Great, thank you. And so then before we get to our second half of our show, just any personal notices. And so I'll mention that our next show is going to be December 10th, and it's actually a preview show for the JP Morgan Healthcare Investor Conference. I got Adam Kaufman. He's a longtime healthcare commentator, and he's actually a health economist. Yes, those things exist. And he has a newsletter bearing on health. And we're going to be doing a preview of what to expect at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. It sets the tone for the next 6 months of the year. That's December 10th, the next show. And then also you can find all my shows and also my live cocktail receptions and parties that I throw at my Eventbrite page, which is stephenwardell.eventbrite.com. Harry, any personal notices for you? Oh, and by the way, Joy in our audience mentions that the Wall Street Journal has just come out with an article that praises Google Gemini and their version 3, which was just launched recently. I don't know what else the article does, but thank you, Joy, for throwing that in the comments. So, and Harry, any personal notices for you?
Well, I write a newsletter called RXR Briefings, and you can sign up for that at therxroundtable.com. THE, the letter R, the letter X, the word roundtable.com. And you can sign up for RXR Briefings, where I write a monthly newsletter and highlight some of the things going on in AI that focus on pharmacy, as well as the general AI space. That's one way to kind of keep track of me, my musings on AI and pharmacy.
Great, thank you. So now we're moving into the second half of the show. And so our show's topic today is GenAI is revolutionizing pharmacy. Pharmacy was based on pills and PBMs were based on margins, and GenAI challenges both. So Harry, why don't you just tell us, how is GenAI impacting pharmacy?
So you have to start with just a basic understanding of pharmacy. We're talking about the practice of pharmacy. We're not talking about the manufacture of pills and capsules, which we will call pharma. So the practice of pharmacy, and just a quick kind of overview, a couple of quick numbers. There are close to 7 billion prescriptions written in the United States in a year. 7 billion prescriptions if you normalize everything to like a monthly supply. So if you get one prescription for a year and you've got 12 refills, we count that as 12. Okay. So that 7 billion is normalized to that. And practically half the population, if not more, is on some chronic med. And when you go into the older classes, the 65 and up, the average is 4 or 5, medicines per person. So and all of that gets dispensed through 50,000 pharmacies in the United States. 50,000. So there's more pharmacies than there are McDonald's and Starbucks combined, I think. And we all know we can find one on every corner or every grocery store. Some of those prescriptions are really easy to fill. They're very simple medications for hypertension or high cholesterol or diabetes. It might be a very simple prescription that can take very little time to fill in the pharmacy. And some of those prescriptions are very expensive and very complicated. That'll take a lot of time to fill and dispense in a pharmacy. Regardless, if you map out the process of filling a prescription, if you just kind of wrote it down like as an industrial engineer, what's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4? There's about 10 steps to that process of getting the prescription in, entering into your system, determining the benefits that the patient has, determining if they're on any other medications, are there any interactions, what's the copay, can the patient pay for the copay, do we need to look for some kind of copay assistance, what kind of follow-up is required, on and on. And the reason I go through all of that is every prescription goes through that process. Sometimes the prescription goes through in a nanosecond because it's so easy. Other times it might take days or weeks if prior auth is involved and you have to get an approval from the insurance company, or you've got to change the brand or something like that. My point in going through all of that is that every one of those steps is a deterministic step, in that the agent, the human, the customer service rep, the pharmacy service rep, the pharmacist who is performing that step is looking at a question that needs an answer, and the answer exists somewhere. It exists in a record. It exists in a clinical trial that drug A interacts with drug B, and you need to do this to avoid that interaction. You don't have to come up with that in your brain. You have to know it, but you could just as easily look it up. And up until AI showed up and large language models, all of this data existed in different platforms. As we know, healthcare is just a tower of Babel of different systems, and interoperability was, the holy grail if we could ever get to interoperability, because we have all of this unstructured data sitting on different systems. Well, now, fascinatingly, we've got this universal translator called a large language model. It's almost like now you take your cell phone and you tour Europe, and you don't need to know German, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Italian. You just pull out your Google Translate and have at it. We essentially have that. It's an oversimplified metaphor. We now have that with AI starting to look at each one of these steps. So the $1 billion that I mentioned earlier, that's being invested in all of these AI companies. There is an AI company or multiple companies developing a single point solution for each one of those steps. And they're knocking on every pharmacy's door out there. I've got an AI solution for intake for you. So all those faxes that you get that you're feeding into optical character recognition to read, you don't need to do that anymore. Feed them into this large language model. It'll read them, and the large language model knows the questions that need to be answered, and we can train it to essentially do your work for you. We can train the large language model to research all of the drug interactions. We can train, obviously, voice agents to counsel patients or encourage patients or check in on patients. So I believe there's a 3-step or a 3-phase process we're going right through right now for pharmacy operations. So we're talking about what's going on inside of the pharmacies. We're trying to validate, we being the pharmacy profession and the operators of pharmacies, we're trying to validate each of these single point solutions. Is it as good as we think it is? Is it reliable? Does it hallucinate? Does it generate the ROI we expect? Ultimately, all the pharmacies have their own operating system. We call them pharmacy management systems. You hear the term PBMs. Everyone's got a pharmacy management system that has lots of plugins for all of these steps. And we're just plugging in these AIs. So right now we're in phase 1. We'll call it single point validation. And then phase 2 is kind of think of each single point as a bot. Phase 2 is bot to bot handoff. The intake bot is going to, or the intake AI agent is going to hand off to the benefit verification agent, who's going to hand it off to the copay assistant agent. And we're going to slowly kind of get the sequencing, the standardization of a sequential transfer from one agent to the next to the next. That's phase 2. Phase 3 will be all of these agents will essentially be absorbed into or take over your pharmacy application. And you will have a very, very smart pharmacy dispensing application that will have exceptions in it that, okay, when the AI can't answer the question, it's going to kick it out. Or where a rule or law or regulation requires the human in the loop, and I'm putting air quotes around that, it'll create a queue for somebody to review. But right now, we're not even sure where those boundaries are with respect to where should the human be in the loop in all of this. The dirty little secret about pharmacy is so much of pharmacy is deterministic. And if you line up all of the healthcare professions, if you just created an axis, a one-line left to right axis, and say what healthcare professions are less data-driven than others. So you might put on one extreme of that physical therapy, okay, kind of hands-on, nursing, not kind of, there's data, but it's not data-driven. It's very hands-on, personal. At the other end, what's data-driven? Pathology, radiology, pharmacy. So pharmacy, I believe, offers great promise for AI, but also great risk in terms of, if we start freeing up lots of labor in pharmacy, what are we going to do with it? And how are we going to redeploy that labor? Are we going to upskill it like we're talking about? Are we going to be able to afford the AI? Because the AI is not going to come free. These valuations are sky high because they're hoping they're going to be able to charge for all of these. So if you're buying a lot of licenses on AI, you better be able to create the margin somewhere. And if it's in productivity gains, okay, maybe we're not going to be able to spend more time with patients, or are we? So I'll stop there. That's just kind of my intro to this.
Yeah, really interesting. And that use of the word deterministic, meaning that the answer exists somewhere. It's a matter of finding it, maybe doing a basic calculation once you have 2 data points for 2 different sources, all be done for the pharmacist. And so on the one hand, it sounds great. You're a pharmacist and your job's got easier. On the other hand, what do they need you for now is a tricky question. I've heard of a similar case, which is that if somebody is trying to get an auto loan, for example, they fill out the paperwork for an auto loan from their local savings and loan, and then the loan officer has somewhere between 30 to 60 minutes worth of work to do, drawing data from the application itself, but also from a credit agency, maybe 2 credit agencies, also other data that they've pulled on this person, putting it together in their own internal sort of calculation, and then deciding whether they want to make an auto loan to this person or not. And that was an important responsibility of this loan officer. And now it's all done in an instant. And so then you're like, well, great, that loan officer gets to be paid the same while having no work to do for an hour. Because it's done instantly. But then part 2 of that is, okay, well then why do you have a loan officer? And the same thing's happening maybe that's more understandable in the case of a car loan, but it's also happening in pharmacy and other places as well.
Now let me give you the optimistic kind of view. Okay. One of the things your listeners need to understand is pharmacy. The practice of pharmacy is regulated at the state level by state boards of pharmacy. The manufacture of drugs is regulated, and the marketing of drugs is regulated at the federal level through the FDA. But the practice of pharmacy is regulated by state boards of pharmacy, just like the practice of medicine is regulated by state boards of medicine. And each state allows pharmacists to do more or less depending on the board and what the board has determined. And there is a move to allow pharmacists to do more. And that process is called full practice authority. In other words, full practice authority. Give pharmacists full authority to practice at the very top of their license. And what that means is you could actually have a pharmacist prescribe drugs based on a pharmacist diagnosing your situation if they felt it was within their scope of capabilities. And right now, states like Idaho, Montana, Colorado, I believe Indiana or Iowa, all have implemented full practice authority. And what is good about this, we have an interesting kind of convergence of a technology, AI, that's going to create more time in pharmacy. Now, pharmacists won't have to spend a lot of time on screens answering all of these questions. Let AI do it. Now, more time to talk to patients about, gee, maybe we should have your high blood pressure. We should do a blood pressure check right here in the store and see if you need a blood pressure medication. And the pharmacist could actually prescribe that. We have a massive shortage of primary care physicians in the United States. We have a major problem with access to primary care. Yet everybody and his mother's brother lives within 5 miles of a pharmacy or something like that in the United States. If we could empower the pharmacists, give them more time as a result of AI and a little liberalization of regulations, we might have a real win-win here. One thing that people don't realize is what's the number one silent killer of Americans? Undiagnosed high blood pressure. High blood pressure is a major problem in this country. Almost 50% of Americans have high blood pressure. Over half Americans have high blood pressure, and half of them, I think, it's undiagnosed and untreated. If we could and easy to check that, you don't even need to do a blood test. I mean, what could be easier than a blood pressure check? If we could empower all the pharmacists to do a blood pressure check and get some reimbursement for it and dispense the medication for it, we would do a lot to increase the health of the population without doing whole body scans and running everybody through, $1,000 longevity programs. I'll get off my soapbox now.
And we've seen the shortage of primary care physicians and all physicians in America has been a 20 plus year phenomenon. And we've seen certain kinds of nurses authorized to practice medicine more. In most states, not everyone can practice medicine. You have to be an MD or DO or someone like that to practice medicine. And then if a nurse is treating you, that nurse is being supervised by the physician who has the license to practice medicine. But in some states, a nurse practitioner can now open up a practice and practice medicine without having a supervisory physician.
Same with pharmacists. The same with pharmacists in those states.
And that's a growing, and that's in recognition that these are trained, responsible professionals, but also in recognition that we have a 20 plus year physician shortage as well. And Felicia adds in the comments, she says pharmacists are already prescribing drugs in all 50 states. So that's interesting. Thank you, Felicia.
It just depends on what drugs in all 50 states. Like contraceptives, they could, or Paxlovid, they could. But depends on the state what a pharmacist can prescribe. They can dispense all drugs, but they can't prescribe all drugs.
So Felicia asks about cost. You've described smart pharmacy software. How much will this cost in comparison to existing pharmacy software? Is it coming in at a higher price point, but a claim of savings in labor, or what do you think?
I think right now we're really early innings on this. The productivity gains are pretty significant, but like I said, it's anecdotal data we're getting. We're not getting massive, really structured analysis, but I'm hearing things like 50%, 70% productivity gains. That is allowing the AI firms to charge a healthy margin on what is essentially a SaaS-based business, right? But just like we're seeing in AI, it seems like a quarter doesn't go by that one of the foundation, the frontier developers or DeepSeek comes out with a massive price cut on their model. This will all eventually commoditize down. And I think it's going to be fairly economical to implement. I can't give you a number, but I'm optimistic that it's going to be widely used and the economics are going to be very favorable to use it. The trick is going to be, can you justify redeploying labor versus eliminating labor?
And one interesting sort of, you could call this computer processing phenomenon, is we've lived through multiple computer revolutions in our lifetime. We've lived through SaaS and cloud and mobility and other computer revolutions. But when you run a Google search, that search is incredibly efficient. It is effectively a search of an index, like a card catalog of the internet. And when you do some workflow automation using a cloud SaaS software program, you're effectively issuing a call on a centralized database. That's incredibly efficient use of energy and resources. It turns out that for the first time in a while, large language models are not efficient. As the large language model gets bigger and more capable, when you ask your question changes from a one sentence question to a two sentence or a three sentence, more sophisticated question asking for more, the amount of processing that requires turns out to be enormous. It's not just a simple database call on an existing database.
Right.
And so yet it seems like our consumer versions are effectively free, but that's because they're being subsidized and people are rushing to do a land rush today. The vendors are rushing to grab territory in a land rush. And we've had interesting breakthroughs. Different chip designs allow us to do things in a more efficient way now than just 3 years ago. Nevertheless, this new world of large language models is going to require a lot of electricity and a lot of chip processing power to do these more sophisticated requests. Every request requiring a lot of compute, unlike Google search, unlike SaaS lines of business. But there's a countering deflationary factor of that we're making ever smaller chips with more transistors on them that are more powerful and cheaper to run, and et cetera. So that's a cost factor for these software vendors. But then they're also claiming to replace labor, which is skilled labor is everywhere the most expensive contributor to the cost structure of businesses. So it's really interesting to see how that plays around. But we're not used to tech being a poor leverage of compute and electricity, which large language models don't achieve leverage. They burn through massive amounts of compute to get good answers. So anyway.
Yeah, don't get me started on power and water, and that's or the fact that no one can tell you exactly how a large language model works. What happens deep inside the neural network? Just like we don't know how our brains work, and we're designing computers to act like our brains.
Yeah, I asked a very sophisticated, my daughter is reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I asked a very, very sophisticated, nuanced question about this of a large language model. I think it was Grok, and I got the most astonishingly elegant, beautiful, wonderful, nuanced answer. And then later, just for giggles, I asked like ChatGPT the same question, and I got a moronic, dumb, stupid answer from it. And so now, a number of people have pointed the following out that I'm going to say, but to use large language models, you sort of need an expert to formulate the question, and that's the beginning. And then the large language model does a lot of shoe leather work for you, it labors in the salt mines for you. And then at the end, you get an answer. And then you sort of need an expert to understand, who already knows everything, to evaluate that answer, or it could be far off the mark, and then say that this is an acceptable, good, this looks right, smells right, it's probably right. And so that's verification at the end. And you sort of, you need very skilled people at both ends to do the beginning and the end, but not the middle, in order to, otherwise you can get terrible answers that are very far off because the large language model didn't understand you. And so I hope that the medically oriented ones minimize hallucinations or bad answers.
Remember what I said. We are in that single point validation phase right now. There are a lot of smart people just taking this a step at a time. But I'll tell you what, we all hear stories of, for all of the money they're spending on these large language models, it still can't answer this question or that sort of thing. I'll tell you one story. This is about 6 months old. I should go back and kind of rerun this experiment. An associate of mine and I were working on Notebook LM, Google's Notebook LM, where you feed it a document and it turns it into a podcast, right? And we fed it 6 documents that were sequenced, document 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, into Notebook LM, and we wanted to summarize it. And it came back and it was garbage. And we couldn't figure out why can't it was mixing up the ideas in, Article 1 with Article 3, 4, and 5. It had completely unsequenced it. And what we realized was Notebook LM couldn't read Roman numerals. The documents were written. Once we changed the Roman numerals to alphanumeric, it was good. And then when we changed it back to Roman numeral, we broke it. And we were like, okay, we're still safe. We can figure out how to break this thing.
And I saw an AI expert held out the following common flaw. And he said, you can go to a large language model and you can say, who is Tom Cruise's mother? And it will instantly answer you and give you the name of Tom Cruise's mother. And then you can then name that woman and say, who is this woman's son? And then it will say, I don't know. How can you even, we're in the same history line. You even know your own history. How can you not tell me? It's because the way that numbers are related, the way that these values are related to each other,
right,
in the weighted array of the model works one way, but not the other.
Right.
And we don't understand it. So how will, and Terry asks a question, your personal thoughts on the positive side of AI. And so I'll mention what I think is a positive of AI. And so I think that for motivated people, the AI is going to let you practice at the top of your license more. It will do so I spent a lot of my time in my life building detailed financial models with drivers that get you to how you make assumptions to get you to the end point. And I could imagine that I could build those very quickly with GenAI. And then after that, I'm at the point of going over scenarios with a CEO and explaining what it means to their burn rate and their cash flow and their cash position without having to do all that work in the build-up. So it allows you to practice at the top of your model. And I would compare it with SaaS workflow automation, which was sort of the opposite. What SaaS workflow automation did is it took beginners and it allowed them to operate like mid-level people. And so if you step into a sales role and they give you a CRM that was used by a competent person before you, it suddenly gives you all the tools that you need to rapidly become sort of a mid-level salesperson, even if you're just a recent college grad and you don't know what you're doing. But GenAI instead allows people who are ambitious, who aspire to practice the top of their license, with less of the pyramid of support that used to exist underneath to do that. So I think that's the positive side. And then Terry also.
Well, let me take a crack at that from a positive. Kind of going back to my comment about full practice authority. Just stand in a drugstore. We've all been in drugstores. Stand in a drugstore, pick your drugstore, and watch what's going on in the pharmacy. And you can generally identify who the pharmacist is. It's probably the one in the white lab coat. Okay, he or she. And if you stand there long enough, you realize they spend a lot of time on the keyboard. They spend an awful lot of time on the keyboard looking at the screen. Now, imagine if they had to do that half as much. Whatever they're doing on those keyboards gets done twice as fast. The amount of time that they have available for customer service, the amount of time they have available to develop a personal relationship with their customers, because generally you're going to your regular pharmacy and the pharmacist probably knows you, but would love to get to know you even better if he or she only had the time. So the challenge is for the management of the pharmacy organizations and the regulators to realize the opportunity that AI presents to go back to my original comment, fill the gap of primary care access for so many people who would like behavioral health screening, high blood pressure screening, blood sugar testing. I mean, it's a finger prick to do a basic blood sugar test. Likewise for cholesterol. So that's the opportunity here. It could be a very bright future.
And so, I see an interesting opportunity for the pharmacy. A patient's experience with a pharmacy is totally different than their experience with their primary care physician if they have one. For the primary care physician, it's a scheduled visit, and so there's no spontaneity involved in this. You could forget the reason you scheduled your primary care visit by the time you get there, or your problem has gone away since then. And then there's conversations people don't want to have with their primary care physician, or they feel guilty about not having taken the drug they were supposed to take. It's a very different experience with the pharmacy. You're there because you were shopping multiple stores in your neighborhood, and maybe you're picking up a prescription, but maybe but you're also going to buy some of the Twixes in the checkout line at the pharmacy as well, and you're going to get shampoo and snack food popcorn while you're in there, whatever. And so, but people also know that you can have convenience care at a pharmacy. There might be a nurse who's there, might be a phlebotomist or someone who would administer a flu vaccine there. There might be a physician available by telehealth there as well.
Right.
And so I could imagine someone goes in and there's a booth, as there are for convenience care, and they're actually talking to an AI about all of the complaints in their life. I have trouble falling asleep at night. I get weird feelings of burn in my stomach from time to time. I keep having this nerve pain in my shoulder that comes back, and I've never been able to do anything about it or whatever. And then but you might have this in a pharmacy casually because you have time on your hands. You're sitting around waiting for something at a pharmacy. It started to rain outside. You're not going to go back to your car until it stops raining, whatever, or you're waiting for you to pick up your pharmacy drug, and you have this conversation, and then it surfaces two over-the-counter products to buy in the pharmacy, and one of them is worth escalating to a nurse who will be available in 20 minutes, who's there on site and who's available in 20 minutes to talk to you about it. And that could be a use of, and then the format is verbal, chat GPT, chat Gemini, whatever, and it knows what's in the store, and it knows what drugs are available in the pharmacy. It knows what's in the OTC store. It knows what's in the pharmacy. It knows who's there. Maybe it knows you, and it knows your benefit. You have you have a benefit, and it's a CVS, and they can mail you a 30-day supply by mail or something. So that there's an interesting possibility it's just a very different approach, a very different experience with a primary care physician, but it would be more responsible to pharmacy.
The point there is pharmacy is accessible. It's much more accessible, and we just need to make it more effective so that the accessibility can be turned into really good outcomes.
And Terry notes that a distinction between the primary care physician and the pharmacist is that we don't get naked in front of the pharmacist.
Fortunately, no.
Getting back to our original topic, how do you think AI is going to impact the customer experience at the pharmacy?
Well, I'm hoping it's going to improve it because I just described it. Okay. One simple way is you're just going to be able to get more face time with the pharmacist. But you also could have, as you described, a virtual physician. You could have virtual pharmacists. Okay. There are companies today that have QR codes on your prescription bottle where you scan the QR code, you get a video recording of a pharmacist telling you about your prescription. So rather than having to read all that fine print of your prescription label and all the side effects, you now just scan the QR code and a pharmacist pops up and gives you a 35-second summary. You can't talk to the pharmacist. You can hit a button and be connected to a pharmacist. But, with all of the advances that are going on, talking about virtual physicians, you're gonna have a virtual version of a pharmacist out there. It's going to have to be highly controlled, regulated, and, kind of made sure it's accurate, but it's coming. Bottom line is I'm hoping the experience is going to improve.
So, and do you think this is going to economically help or hurt the corner drugstore? What do you think?
The corner drugstore, the unfortunate thing is there's probably too many corner drugstores in the United States. But the problem is the ones that are closing are in places where we want to keep them open. In rural America, in tough sections of town, underprivileged areas. Okay. in the suburbs where you've got, essentially 4 pharmacies on a corner because you've got a CVS and a Walgreens staring at one another, and one is in the outlot of the Publix grocery store and the other is in the outlot of the Walmart, and each of those have pharmacies in it. That's kind of too many pharmacies. Okay, but we're not going to close one of those. We're the ones that are going down are economically kind of out in the hinterland where we need to keep them open that can really provide primary care. So the National Community Pharmacy Association is working very hard on behalf of all of the independent pharmacies to kind of ensure their economic survival as a result of things like the IRA and stuff like that. And hopefully, as regulations change and pharmacists can do more under a full practice authority schema, they could charge for that and they could get more revenue for that.
And I see what we're seeing from AI is an extension of the virtualization that we've seen in the past, where there's some things that can now be done remotely. And so you could have some sort of pharmacy business that doesn't have corner shops, doesn't have bricks and mortar, and they can do things remotely. And I see we're going to have more of that, and that would hurt your bricks and mortar corner store. But it would also empower your bricks and mortar corner store to do more as well. And so it's going to require change and adaptation, but there's a plus and a minus here to the corner.
The plus of direct to consumer, you can now go to a lot of websites and get medicine. Roe, Hims, Hers, Women's Health, Men's Health. That's great. It's accessible. People are getting their prescriptions, are getting care that they never got before. All they need to do is have a mobile phone. But it is pulling volume out of drugstores that need the volume. But maybe new people are getting treated, so that's a good thing. So like you say, it is a plus and minus.
And then will we have virtual AI-powered pharmacists in the future? And so let me just mention, in the world of medicine, there's physicians who are using more powerful tools, and they are responsible for the tools they use. And so if they use an AI tool that hallucinates and is wrong, they're responsible. The AI tool is not responsible. It could be sued, but it's not responsible. And the physicians have to make sure that they choose the right tool and use it correctly. And then at the next level up, there's beyond just a physician using a tool, there's these terms that are coming to us from other areas of AI where there's in the loop and on the loop. And so in the loop means that for every cycle, every decision, there is a human who's in the loop and who makes the decision with the help of this assistance.
Right.
And on the loop means that there's many cycles happening at the same time, and somehow the responsible authority is brought in when needed to the many cycles. They're not in the loop every time. They're on the loop. There's 100 of these happening at the same time, but things get surfaced to the decision maker when they need to be in order for the decision maker to make a decision. And so I think we'll see a growing amount of this happen, but there still needs to be a human, whether they are using a tool, whether they're in the loop, whether they're on the loop, to be responsible and because our system sort of, that's a key element people don't understand. These skilled professionals, they do labor, but they're also responsible is one of their most, and you need a person to go to when something is wrong. And that's the pharmacist or the physician or the nurse.
The corollary to that in pharmacy, that's a good kind of description, in the loop and on the loop. So on the loop would be you're in a pharmacy and you have a number of AI agents doing benefit verification, and you do not have somebody in the loop on every one of those benefit verifications because you validated that. You're supervising 100 agents that are doing all your BV, benefit verification. In the loop is you're using AI to help you determine if there is a drug interaction on the 10 meds, 10 different prescriptions that Mrs. Smith is taking, who has diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, a little bit of depression, and, God knows what skin disorder. And you're going to use AI to help you sort through all of the potential interactions, but you're going to look that over and then you're going to apply your judgment before you open your mouth and start talking to Mrs. Smith to say, you need to lower your dose on this, or you need to take this in the morning and that one in the evening.
And for our audience, any final, we're approaching the bottom of the hour, any final questions for Harry? And for Harry, any other thoughts? We introduced this as GenAI is revolutionizing pharmacy. Any concluding thoughts about what this is doing to pharmacy and PBMs?
I think it's yet to be determined. It's in our hands to essentially guide the profession, the business, and the regulators to realize how much time this could free up. And if you want to continue to follow me on this topic, it's rxrbriefings.com is also the website to the newsletters. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. You're probably going to ask that anyway. Harry Travis, you can find me on LinkedIn.
That's great. Thank you. Well, thanks so much for coming on board. It's been great chatting with you about GenAI is revolutionizing pharmacy. And for our audience, you've been listening to the Digital Health Investor Talk show. So you can call on Wardell Advisors for fundraising and growth. And many thanks to you, Harry Travis, for the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Steve. That was a lot of fun.
And we'll be publishing this show as an episode of the Digital Health Investor Talk show on Apple and Spotify. Don't forget to rate us and like the show. And then our next show will be Wednesday, December 10th with Adam Kaufman speaking on what to expect from the JP Morgan Healthcare Investor Conference in January in San Francisco. Thanks very much and see you later. Thank you. Bye-bye.